second hour edition of Justice. I'm Janine Pirro. Thanks for being with us tonight. Here's what we know. 11 people killed, at least 6 injured. 4 of those hurt are police officers who responded to the scene. The gunman opened fire inside the Tree of Life synagogue during a baby naming ceremony this morning. That gunman, identified by police tonight as 46-year-old Robert Bowers, a man who had apparently posted anti-Semitic hate speech online, but was not specifically known to law enforcement. President Trump has condemned the attacks, but did continue with plans for a pre-midterm political rally in Illinois tonight. Here's some of what the president had to say.
Tonight, everyone in this arena and every citizen across the land sends our prayers to the victims and their families. We all do. We also send our gratitude to the law enforcement officers who were incredible and who risked their lives and sustained very, very serious injuries during this horrible attack. We salute the heroes of American law enforcement. We always do. We know how much we appreciate them, and yet they're underappreciated. They have done such an incredible job for so long, and it's a tough job. We see it now. We see it now, maybe like we've never seen it before. And this is the time to renew the bonds of love and loyalty that hold us all together as Americans. These bonds have always sustained our nation in its hour of need. You know that. Everybody here knows that. And they are always more powerful than the forces of hatred and division, anger and evil. In America, we love our families, we love our neighbors, and we protect our community. We trust in God. We protect the freedom of worship. And we believe in the power of prayer. We defend our Constitution. We defend our heritage. And we rally around our great American flag. All of us here tonight are united by these same American values, and we are all fighting to defend these values. But we can't allow people like this to become important. And when we change all of our lives in order to accommodate them, it's not acceptable. So I thought of it for a little while, and the press said, are you going to cancel these 2 events? And frankly, the future farmers, I could have done that one, but this is a rally for Mike Bost, and frankly, this one maybe I could have, except I don't want to change our life for somebody that's sick and evil, and I don't think we ever should.
That was President Trump this evening in Illinois addressing the horrific shooting. Let's get the latest on the investigation now from Fox News reporter Garrett Tenney, live in Pittsburgh. Garrett?
Well, Judge, the Tree of Life Synagogue is really the focal point for this very tight-knit Jewish community. 3 congregations worship there, and several dozen people were there this morning for this morning's the beginning of this morning's Shabbat services. A baby naming ceremony was just getting underway around 9:53 this morning when a man walked in with an assault rifle and 3 handguns and reportedly yelled, "All Jews must die," before he opened fire. It only took a couple of minutes for police to respond, but by the time they got there, the gunman had killed 11 people and injured 2 others. When the shooter was on his way out, he shot 1 officer and then ran back inside as the SWAT team moved in. Parishioners in other parts of the building barricaded themselves inside their rooms as the gunman exchanged fire with police for another 15 or so minutes. Eventually, the gunman surrendered after he'd been shot several times, but at that point, he had shot an additional 2 officers. Law enforcement officials described the scene as the most horrific they have ever seen, but said if it wasn't for the quick response by police, it would have been much worse.
The actions this person took today were hateful. We're in the early stages of this investigation, and over the next several days and weeks, we will look at everything in the suspect's life, his home, his vehicle, his social media, and his movements over the last several days.
We simply cannot accept this violence as a normal part of American life. These senseless acts of violence are not who we are as Pennsylvanians. They're not who we are as Americans.
The AP reports that federal prosecutors have now charged the suspect, Robert Bowers, with 29 charges, including hate crime charges. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said those charges will open up the possibility of the death penalty in this case. Now, the FBI says at this point they don't believe the 46-year-old was on law enforcement's radar before today's shooting. He is from the Pittsburgh area. Several neighbors have described him as quiet and someone who have kept to himself, but they say they saw no red flags, according to local reports. Several neighbors also reportedly said Bowers told them he worked as a trucker, he would be in a few days and then would be gone for a few days at a time. The FBI is also investigating his social media accounts and the possibility that he announced his intentions before the shooting on there. About an hour before today's shooting, an account on the social media site Gab matching his name made one of many anti-Semitic posts and concluded with, quote, "I'm going in." That account has been suspended and the data is now with the FBI. We are expecting to get more information on the investigation, the charges, and of course on the victims tomorrow morning at a press conference at 9 a.m. Judge.
Garbage. Garrett Tenney, thanks so much. And joining me now with his take on today's shooting and the investigation is former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI, Danny Colson. Danny, thanks for being here tonight. Now, look, one of the things that, people obviously go to when they hear about things like this is they think about whether or not this could happen to me. I mean, obviously there is empathy, there is sympathy, but I think human nature is such that, could this thing happen to me? So when the president says, as he said today, if the Pittsburgh synagogue had an armed guard, results would have been, quote, far better. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, ma'am, I totally agree with that. Armed security is important, but maybe more important is training for the people that were there. And I think they had some. If you heard the reporter, he talked about some of the people barricaded, and that's what we teach in our classes, barricade or get out. And you need to get ready. When you go to the movie theater, where do you sit? How do you get out of the theater? When you go to a restaurant? That's not being paranoid. That's being prepared. And I do agree with the president. Armed security can stop these things if they're well trained and committed to their jobs.
Well, what's interesting about this is that this clearly was not a guy, as I spoke about in the first hour of the show, who was insane because he was lucid. He made it clear what his intent was, what he planned to do, and that he was going in. But even more significant is the fact that, he wasn't into getting shot by police. And so, the fact is that when he got into a gunfight, he was the coward who ran in to protect himself. I guess the question that I was trying to ask earlier is, in the private sector, whether you go to church or whether you're at a job, I mean, does business have an obligation to tell its employees what to do, whether it's a synagogue, a religion, an ethnic, religious, sexual, or just a lunatic nut job? This can happen anywhere in America.
There's no doubt about that. It happens in schools, it happens in churches, it happens at movie theaters, it happens at concerts. I think you're familiar with that. So I think we all have, as employers, we have a duty to tell our people, how do we live through these things? It's basic. We furnish them with insurance policies in some cases. Well, let's furnish them with training. How do we live through these things? And remember, police only minutes away. They did a great job responding.
Oh, they were fabulous. Yeah.
Fabulous, but seconds matter, and that's really important. You can do a lot of carnage in 10, 15, 30, 20 seconds, and you're better off having somebody in defending you than having somebody coming to defend you. You want to have your security right there with you.
Yeah. All right. And let's talk about the fact that this guy was a licensed gun owner, apparently had long guns also. But other than, this blog that I find very disconcerting. I mean, everybody said he's a quiet guy. You know it and I know it. We did this for years. He's always a nice guy, always kept to himself, always said hello, whatever. And, then there's a mass murderer. But what he said on that blog, that he was tired of the, HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, bringing in the immigrants, and that he was going to, take care of it. He's going to take care of everyone. I'm going in. What are we going to do about that kind of stuff when it makes it on social media? I mean, the First Amendment protects that speech, correct?
Absolutely. He is protected by the First Amendment, and the FBI can only investigate things that the AG guidelines allows them to investigate, and that's very, very restrictive. So that's not actionable intelligence. That's rhetoric, and rhetoric is not against the law, even if it's anti-Semitic rhetoric. It's legal. Unfortunately, it's legal, but there's consequences to that. So we have to be prepared to take care of ourselves. It's very important that we're ready and we're prepared, and we also have an obligation to each other, to protect each other. And I think that's something that we really need to think about.
Interesting. Gives us a lot to think about. Danny Colson, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, ma'am. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. More ahead on tonight's breaking news throughout this special edition of Justice. And next, we'll talk about the midterms and more with former Donald Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski.
I could have had a little bit of an excuse. There was no excuses. We have our lives, we have our schedules, and nobody's going to change it, okay? And if you don't mind, I'm going to tone it down just a little bit. Is that okay? You're from Illinois. I had a feeling you might say that.
Welcome back to Justice. That was President Trump addressing why he decided not to cancel a rally in Illinois tonight in the wake of that deadly synagogue shooting. As we've been reporting, 11 people are dead and at least 6 injured in Pittsburgh today. Here to talk about that, as well as more on the elections just over a week away, is former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Corey, thanks for being here. Your take on what happened today in the synagogue?
Well, a disgusting, terrible tragedy that the nation is going to mourn the loss of these individuals for a long time. But what we have to understand was what was the motive behind this. This is an individual who clearly was anti-Semitic, hated Donald Trump, hated Jewish people for all the wrong reasons, and decided to take it upon himself to go and commit this heinous crime. We need to do better, and we have to find individuals like this, and we need the community to help us find those people.
What did he do that you know them? Corey, let me ask a question. What did he do that we know of that could have stopped this?
Well, we don't know, but what we need to know is who he interacted with on a daily basis. What was his rhetoric before? Were there any indications or signs that would have given us the opportunity to go and have a question and answer period with him about a potential tendency to go and commit a crime like this? We have to rely on the people who know him the best.
Okay, yes. He put on a blog that he apparently had been taken off of because of his language, that he was tired of the HIAS, which is the I think it's the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, bringing in these immigrant caravans that come in to slaughter us. And so he was sick of it, and he was going to take care of it himself. And he said, I'm going in. So let's talk about monitoring that kind of stuff, Corey. I mean, what do you do there? Do you cross-check whether the guy has a license? And apparently he was a licensed gun owner. But how do we do that?
Well, you know, Judge, the best scenario that I can remember is the San Bernardino killing. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Where the woman went, and what happened, if you remember, was the neighbors actually called the police and said, we think there's a problem next door. You need to go and investigate it. And the police dropped the ball on that one. And look, as a former law enforcement officer, Judge, I know how stretched the police are. But we need community people. When they see something that could be wrong, they need to let other people know about it. And we need to find out if his neighbors, his friends, if he had any, his colleagues, his family, ever were aware of him saying something that could have prevented this terrible tragedy from happening.
But his neighbors say, Corey, that he was a nice guy, he was a quiet guy, he would say hello, the same nonsense you hear about every serial murderer, in your career and in mine. I think the scary thing right now is that if this guy is alone and acted alone, and we don't know any of this for sure, that any of us can be a victim. And so what does this mean in terms of how we behave? We got to hope that people say something. And you know what, Corey? I really believe that people now are nosy enough, based on the politics of the world today, that they are going to say something. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong at all. And look, we need to be vigilant. We need to be vigilant in our communities, in our place of worship, and in our daily lives. Look, the world is a dangerous place, and this past week should remind everybody that anybody could be a victim. What took place today was a horrific tragedy that could have taken place not only in Pittsburgh, it could have taken place anywhere. In small towns and big towns, it could take place anywhere. So we need to be vigilant, and we need to do a better job as a community of looking for problems and reporting those problems.
Okay, so let's say that this guy is a guy who is just a hateful guy, and he hasn't been involved with anyone. The question that I think is inevitable to everyone is, do you think he was ginned up by the rhetoric of what's going on in the world today? Whatever side you're on, I don't really care anymore. That he felt by the way, you said it right, he hated Trump, all right, but that this is a guy who, just got fed up with it all and was going to take it out on innocent Jewish people in a house of worship.
I do think I said this recently, I think the rhetoric is very high when you have the former highest law enforcement officer in our land saying when they're down, we kick them. When you have Maxine Waters and others saying if you see them in a restaurant, get in their face, go after them, right? That is intolerable anymore, Judge. We've now seen exactly what has taken place by this visceral rhetoric on both sides, candidly. One individual is sending, bombs to individuals, and that's a tragedy, and now we see this disgusting display today. Look, we've got 10 days before an election,
right,
and I fight every day as hard as I can for my team to win, but I want to do it fairly, and I want to do it in a manner that allows us to have conversations when it's over. And believe me, Judge, I want to win the election. I fight to win elections, but I'm not going to fight to the point where we're seeing people being killed over it. We need to do a better job as society, and we need to come together and have a conversation when this election is done or before to allow us to all remember one thing. We're the greatest country in the world. We need to work together to keep it that way. All
right. You remember when Steve Scalise was shot on the baseball field. The shooter goes over and says, are they Republicans or Democrats? He gets the answer, the Republicans. He shoots them. Oh, we're all going to come together. Everything's going to get better. Didn't get better at all. Now what?
No, you're exactly right. And I saw Steve Scalise just last week, and he's still walking with a cane. He's made a remarkable recovery. But you have to remember, Judge, not only was he shot and other staff there and other Capitol Police officers were shot.
You're right.
But we also saw, look at what happened to Vanessa Trump. She talked about it. The letter that she opened that had a white powder on it in front of her family, where she had on her face, on her body, she wrote an open letter this week about the horror and the scare that she had to endure for 2 weeks because some lunatic mailed her a package. And we've seen this now on both sides. And what we need to do is we need to remember what's important, what our priorities are as a country. And that should be Homeland security, national security, economic security, and our families. That's what should be our priorities as a nation, and not taking out our visceral hatred on one another.
And it was kind of sad, Corey, I have to say, for me in particular, and I fought for a hate crime. I mean, I saw a lot of anti-Semitic behavior, and you kind of wish that was behind us in our history. But it's almost like a legacy that you continue to go after the Jewish people. I mean, why they're targeted so much, sometimes by the right and the left. I mean, it is mind-boggling. Anyway, Corey Lewandowski, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Good to see you.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. And more now on the investigation into the Pittsburgh shooting that's left 11 people dead, 6 injured. That shooter, Robert Bowers, now charged with 29 federal counts. Let's get some more perspective now on what investigators in Pittsburgh are up against. I'm joined by the man who led the investigation into another mass shooting, the Mandalay Bay Massacre in Las Vegas just over a year ago. Retired Las Vegas Assistant Sheriff Tom Roberts is on the phone. Sheriff, thanks for calling in. And if I am correct, it is almost a year to the day. It was in October of 2017 that the Mandalay shooting in Las Vegas occurred. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am, Judge. It was October 1. It was a little over a year ago.
All right. And, you know, that crime in particular shocked us. It stunned the nation. I don't know that we've even come to grips with what it was about, why it was done, what was the message. Do we have any clear understanding of this guy? Did he act alone? And then I want to go into what you learned from that we could use here.
Well, I don't think we'll ever know what motivated the gentleman to shoot all the people attending the concert in Las Vegas. We dug and dug and dug through his computers and everything. We never really found the motive, and I don't know if we ever will. Quite different than what you have in Pittsburgh. I think we know exactly what motivated the gentleman today to do what he did. And, you know, and Corey and you were talking earlier, you know, as I think it's important that people, when they see or pick up this errant behavior, either whether it's on social media or whatever, that they say something, so that you do have an opportunity to intervene, you know, before they do act.
Yeah. But, you know, Sheriff, I must tell you, it reminds me of Parkland. I think it was Parkland, where the FBI got a call from people who said, this kid, Nicholas Cruz, he's definitely going to kill kids. We said this, and this. And, you know, the FBI comes out and they say, oh, we couldn't do anything. It's First Amendment, which was a bunch of hogwash because it was specific as to the name of the person, what the school was, how he was going to do it. They could have checked if he had the guns. But this guy says, you know, I'm going in. I'm tired of the Jews bringing these immigrants in. I mean, this is a guy who was blaming the left and actually didn't like Trump either, who goes in. What can we do when we read these messages? I mean, can law enforcement do anything?
Well, of course we can. I think it's important that when you do read these messages, you report them. Even though the FBI may not be able to open a federal case, local authorities can. And I can tell you in Las Vegas, we did on multiple occasions. Anytime that we had people spewing rhetoric, I mean, we picked up social media posts from Interpol that told us about individuals that were just spewing all kinds of rhetoric, you know, about shooting people, and we went and intervened. And then once we intervened, I think it's important that you continue to monitor those people. We see several examples around the country where we did intervene, but then we failed to keep a monitor on them, you know, and check up with them on a regular basis. Not saying anybody dropped the ball here. We won't know until we dig further into it or find out what exactly was or wasn't done. But, you know, as you look at these in retrospect, a lot of times there were times where we could have intervened and maybe stop something from happening.
Well, I must tell you, Sheriff, I mean, it's always good to hear when someone says, you know, we can act on that, and I absolutely agree with you. I think there's a lot of follow-up that can be done in these cases. I want to thank you for what you did in Las Vegas, and thanks for joining us tonight on Justice, Sheriff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate what you do.
All right. We'll check in at a vigil for the victims in Pittsburgh in a few moments. And next, more from my conversation tonight from President Trump's son, Eric Trump. Justice rolls on in a moment. Welcome back to a special 2-hour edition of Justice on this solemn day in America. If you missed it last hour, I spoke on the phone with Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and the President's son, Eric Trump, about today's shooting and more. Take a look and listen. Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and the President's son, Eric Trump. He joins me now by phone. Good evening, Eric.
Good evening, Judge. How are you?
Your reaction, Eric, to the horror that happened today in a place of worship in Pittsburgh?
Listen, America mourns, right? I mean, this whack job destroyed lives. He upended a community. He should get the death penalty. I mean, there's no question about it. He should absolutely get the death penalty. You know, there's 11 people who are no longer on this earth because of his actions. And it's horrible. And you know what we do in time like this also need to give a major shout-out to law enforcement because the job they did today was incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible.
Right, and I'm going to talk about that more with some of my law enforcement guests. But you know, Eric, as we look at the news of the past week, is it a sign of the times? Yesterday, someone arrested for sending pipe bombs to several people, and then today, this individual shooting up in a place of worship and killing 11 people, 6 more injured. Is this a sign of the rhetoric and the outrage that people are hearing? Is there any correlation between the two?
I don't know. Listen, there might be and there might not be. I mean, at the end of the day, this is obviously a very sick, deranged human, subhuman. He shouldn't even be called a human, but, you know, I mean, it's a very, very sick, deranged person. They did this, and, you know, it seems like we've gotten to a point in life and society where everything has to be kind of politicized. Everything has to be, you know, somebody has to point the, you know, political finger to absolutely everything. I mean, at the end of this day, this guy is a sick person. He did the most unthinkable thing imaginable. He went to a place of worship, shot it up. Again, there are 11 people who are dead now because of it. And, you know, I think we should actually try and pull politics out of some of these things. I mean, this person doesn't represent the left. He doesn't represent the right. The person was sick, deranged. And again, I truly hope, if found guilty, which he will be, that he gets the death penalty. All
right, and certainly a good point in not viewing everything through the political lenses that people seem to be looking through these days. But let me ask you about your dad. Your dad indicated today that he thought about actually canceling the rally. But he said something interesting. He said, we don't want to let those crazies control, you know, what we do. And it kind of reminds me, Eric, I mean, you were in New York, in New York City on 2001 9/11, as was I, where we all said we're not going to let these crazy people stop us from conducting our ordinary everyday affairs. Do you think your dad should have gone through with that rally?
I do, and I thought he said it beautifully. I mean, he said you can't let evil change your life, and I think that's 100% right. I mean, if every single time evil lashed out, it changed everybody's pattern, it changed their lives, it changed society stopped, you'd live in a much different world. And, you know, it's always incidents like this, whether it be the 9/11s or, you know, tragic shootings like the one we had today, that actually brings America together. And, you know, clearly the person is trying to tear apart, you know, our country apart, a community apart. They're trying to do massive evil. And it's amazing how the world works, that, you know, sometimes it actually does the exact opposite. Once you get past the horrible act, it actually brings society together. And, you know, you have an entire country that's mourning for, you know, a small town in Pennsylvania and for a specific synagogue and for a group of people, again, whose lives were upended. And so, you know, this does bring America together in a time where, you know, you can say that, you know, America can often be fractured because of, you know, so many different, you know, variables.
You know, and I think the sad part, it's always sad, but, you know, but the selection of a particular group based upon their religion in a place of worship on Shabbat, I mean, it is a particularly heinous act. But let's talk about what's going to happen in the next 8 or 9 days, the midterms. How does America turn from its focus on some of these horrific things that we're seeing daily in the news to focusing on what's important in terms of the country continuing on the course that it's on, and getting people to focus on real politics as opposed to the rhetoric that is making up politics?
Well, you know, and you do hope they focus on the real issues as opposed to rhetoric. You know, this obviously aside, because this is absolutely horrible what happened, and you have other tragedies. I mean, obviously look at the hurricane that hit North Florida, the Panhandle, of Florida, so hard. But you know, obviously, you know, those are unthinkable things. But you do think that people can get past some of the other rhetoric that they see in the media every single day, because, you know, Judge, America's winning right now. I mean, we're winning. Our economy's winning. Our military's winning. Our veterans are winning. I mean, just about everything's winning. I mean, we've got the fastest-growing GDP, and, you know, one of the fastest-growing GDPs in the history of the country. We have the lowest unemployment. You know, manufacturing's coming back to this country. The stock markets are at record highs. You know, 401ks have done tremendously well, and I can go on and on and on. You know, the price for prescription drugs is coming down, something that my father made a big focus on last week. I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but I mean, our country is thriving. We're no longer getting ripped off by China. We're no longer getting ripped off by Mexico. You know, we're the envy of the world right now. I mean, America is the envy of the world, and it's hard to say on a day like today when something so tragic happened. But our economy is doing great. Our country is doing great. We're just raised the #1 economy on Earth, and so you hope a lot of the rhetoric gets put aside, and you hope people focus on all the positive attributes and, you know, the many great things that's happening in our country right now.
But, you know, when you talk about it, Eric, it's almost as though there isn't one metric that hasn't improved under your father, and yet the left is so dug in, so angry. And when you see, you know, the rhetoric of people who are congresswomen, congressmen, you wonder how you can get people to take their sights off of that anger and turn it towards something positive.
Yeah, it's almost amazing. When you're doing the best, it's almost people are the most angry, and it's kind of interesting. And, you know, I've seen it personally where, you know, you see a lot of the left lashing out, and, you know, they don't have a great message right now. You know, they want to, you know, double people's taxes. They want to constantly attack law enforcement. Again, days like today make, you know, that just unthinkable. I mean, they're the bravest men and women that we have in the country, but
without a doubt,
you know, the country is doing amazingly well. We're winning. We're winning on every metric, and if you can put aside the rhetoric and you can actually look at quantifiable, you know, statistics and quantifiable measures, our country is doing the best it's ever done before. And as Americans, you know, hopefully days like today make us rally around that we are Americans, that we all, you know, bleed the same red, white, and blue. I mean, we love this country. We love our nation. We want our nation to be successful, and our people to be safe. Everybody should cool it down a little bit.
Yes. All right. Eric Trump, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Judge. Great to be here.
All right. Thank you. Next.
Silence in the cold rain, and then carried on a vigil with a little bit of music and some speakers. And what's really so disturbing is that the majority of the people that we talk to in this neighborhood say they still don't know the names of the people murdered in that synagogue. And they're on edge because tomorrow morning they will likely find out if one of their colleagues or their friends or one of their own was one of those killed inside of that synagogue. We spoke to some of those people, and here's what they had to say.
The first thought was to pray, and I was very, very angry that in America, on our soil, that this type of massacre can occur in a place of worship, probably the worst ever.
Everybody cares for everybody here. I mean, you don't have to be Jewish. Everybody respects everybody, as the world should be. And again, I just can't express the sadness for all of us.
A lot of good energy and prayers coming in tonight, but people we talk to say they now fear, they know that this neighborhood will forever be known as a place of a site of terror and a shooting like Columbine and Parkland. And tomorrow morning, we expect to get the names of the 11 people murdered here in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Judge.
Matt, I have a question for you. I understand that the mayor is not willing to release the names of the victims, or not able to until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. But for those individuals, and I guess the fear is that you're not able yet to get the names of the next of kin, and I understand that. But for those people who are there and who think that their mother or father or sister is in there, why can't they answer that question now if the closest family members are there? Do you know?
Well, you know, Judge, perhaps the people we were talking to tonight weren't next of kin. Maybe next of kin has been notified, but some of the people at the vigil said, you know, I know someone who does go to that synagogue, and I'm not sure if they were in there today. I haven't found out yet. So maybe they're not direct family members, but they are friends or colleagues or co-workers or a neighbor.
All right. Okay. Matt Finn, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Are you more vulnerable in a place of worship than you may think? We'll answer that question and check in with the latest on the investigation next. The The suspect is in custody, but the investigation into today's mass murder inside a Pittsburgh synagogue is really only just beginning. Bernard Zapor is a professor of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University. He's also a former special agent in charge of the ATF. Bernard, good evening.
Good evening.
All right. Now, I understand that in your experience in 2012, when you were with the ATF, there were 13 murders inside of a temple. Do you see anything, or did you learn anything from that you think needs to be applied in the investigation into the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh?
Yes, Judge. Of course, one of the big takeaways is just the bottomless depravity that we have as human beings against one another.
It's true.
And unfortunately, and as demonstrated today, there is no ceiling to the goodness of people like these officers who put themselves at risk to save more members of this community. The takeaway from the Sikh temple massacre was that when you're in church, you're in your place of worship, your body's there, but your mind and spirit is elsewhere. That's that much more of a disadvantage, that much more of an advantage of somebody who would commit such an act, for somebody to have even that millisecond of a chance to gather themselves to perhaps run, hide, or fight. And you know, it's interesting too, Bernard, because when you're in a church, I guess, or a temple, or a synagogue, or wherever, your back is to the door, isn't it? Well, I think about the horrific Texas church shooting after Las Vegas massacre, with those poor people. They were in a box. They were facing forward. The shooter came in with his assault weapon and harvested innocent people. And it's just catastrophic. Well, you know, the president today said that, you know, had they had a security guard, it might not have been as bad as it was. And I mean, so where are we now? I mean, you know, you think that the murder of innocents over their religion or their ethnicity is something of the past, but it is not. And in today's, you know, highly charged rhetoric, whether it's part of it or the equation or not, I don't know. But these kind of things should have stopped a long time ago. What do we do now, Bernard? I mean, in your experience, what you've seen, what does the individual who's watching this show say to himself, you know, when I'm in the mall, when I'm in, you know, synagogue or church, or when I'm in my car at a red light? I profess to everybody that I could even speak to, and I think this should be a standard for any place that holds meetings, that has